I heard the splash first, that unmistakable plop of something weighty striking the water, and when I sprinted out to my dock with my fishing rod in hand, I found myself facing a brand new wrought iron gate gleaming under the sun like some smug monument to absurdity. Behind it, a gleaming silver plaque declared, "Private HOA access only, violators will be prosecuted." My dock, my lake, my property, blocked off as though I were trespassing in my own backyard. To top it all off, a security camera pointed right at me, blinking red like a robotic middle finger. That was when I realized something sinister was afoot, and her name, I would soon learn, was Karen Rausch. Living by the lake had always been my dream. After 27 years of designing highway overpasses and drainage systems, I finally cashed out and moved into a modest A-frame cabin tucked at the edge of Hemlock Lake, a tranquil, blue haven wrapped in pines. My backyard sloped gently into reeds and opened into the water. Every morning, I would stroll barefoot to the old wooden dock, thermos in hand, and fish in the mist. I'd paid it all off. No mortgage, no liens, and certainly no HOA nonsense, or so I believed. That morning, instead of casting a line, I stood slack-jawed before an unauthorized gate that sliced through my peaceful access. I followed the fence with my eyes. Black steel bars stretched in both directions like a dystopian barrier, running all the way up to my neighbor's property line, then snaking back toward the private road leading into the subdivision. Who in their right mind installs a fence around someone else's lake access with no warning? Later that afternoon, I got my answer when Karen Rausch herself came striding up the gravel path, clipboard clutched like it contained holy commandments. She wore a stiff lavender blouse, wedge sandals ill-suited for gravel, and an expression that could curdle milk. Before I spoke, she grinned that tight-lipped smile and gestured at the gate like it was a game show prize. "We've installed a protective barrier around the lake, strictly for residents of the association, liability concerns," she said in that tone used for announcing bake sales. I blinked. I live right there. This is my lake access. Karen cocked her head and laughed like I'd misunderstood something charming but incorrect. "Well, technically, the access strip is now managed by the Hemlock Shores Homeowners Association. You must have missed the notices. Several were sent out. Safety first, right?" I felt my blood pressure spike behind my eyes. "Karen, I didn't get any notice. How could you build this? That land isn't part of your HOA." She gave a saccharine shrug. "Oh, but it is now. The HOA acquired the lease. It was managed by the old bait shop owner, bless his soul, but after he passed, it reverted to open bid. We secured it and redesignated it as common HOA property. That old bait shop was a narrow strip of land between my property line and the water. A rickety shack full of minnows and soda cans. I'd assumed it fell under my deed or some county easement, but apparently, it didn't. Karen had slithered in and snapped it up like a hawk grabbing prey. "Let me guess," I said. "You didn't tell anyone nearby?" She tapped the clipboard. "It was all discussed in our October meeting. You're welcome to submit an appeal, but as a non-member, you won't have voting rights." I was stunned. I'd owned my cabin before this subdivision existed, yet here stood the local Napoleon, cordoning off my lake access as if it belonged to her. The next day, I tried to cut through the gate with bolt cutters, a renegade freedom fighter hacking at tyranny. I only got partway before Karen arrived with a security guard and called the sheriff. The deputy was as baffled as I was, but after checking maps, he said that while I owned the cabin and surrounding land, the strip with the dock and gate was under the HOA's lease. Karen watched with a smugness that suggested she'd been sipping a martini at the opera. By the end of the week, a sign read, "Do not trespass, $10,000 fine," and the blinking camera watched my every move. I tried going through the HOA board, attending one meeting, but it was like walking into a soap opera run by suburban villains. Everyone was either petrified of Karen or hypnotized by her illusions of authority. Someone said, "You're not on the lake list anymore," and I nearly laughed. Lake list? Then came the real bombshell: Karen had the only key to the lock. For days, I sulked, wondering whether to hire an attorney and hemorrhage thousands reclaiming this sliver of land or maybe dig a tunnel beneath the fence. I even imagined constructing a floating dock off my own shoreline and staging a kayak invasion, just to prove a point. Then I saw the "For Sale" sign, discreetly posted on the parcel beside the fence strip. The same land Karen had leased was, by a legal quirk, split into 2 narrow lots. I called the number. The agent practically begged me to make an offer. The seller was an older woman in Alaska who'd inherited the land and forgotten about it. That night, I sipped coffee on my porch, staring at the faint glow of the gate in the moonlight, and I started grinning. If Karen wanted control so badly, she was about to hand it right to me. I would buy the land holding the actual gate key. 2 weeks later, I had the deed in hand, a proud owner of a thin, seemingly overlooked but now incredibly valuable parcel, including the fence Karen had installed. When she'd leased the adjacent parcel, she'd assumed the entire property was one piece, but the sliver containing the gateposts wasn't under that lease. I bought it for less than a new fishing boat. It was poetic justice. She'd locked me out, but now I owned the lock that I waited a week before acting, letting the gate become permanently lodged in the HOA's mind. Hemlock Shores was hosting its annual summer brunch by the water, right on the other side of my old dock. I watched them set up chairs and a tent, hauling out a chocolate fountain, an absurd level of pretense. That morning, I strolled down to the gate with a lockpick kit. Not to break in, but to replace the lock entirely. I installed a heavy-duty padlock with an authoritative click, then affixed a new sign: "Private property, access by owner, permission only." When the HOA crowd arrived in their pastel polos and sun hats, Karen marched over, wearing that infuriatingly smug grin and gripping her clipboard. She tried her key. It didn't work. She twisted, banged it, turned red, then addressed the onlookers with a forced smile, calling it a minor lock glitch. I sipped lemonade and waited for her to notice me. Then I waved and tossed her a copy of the deed. She read it in disbelief. Finally, she managed, "This must be a mistake. You can't just buy community property." I leaned against the fence. Exactly. I didn't. I bought my property, the spot where your gate stands, including that swath of land up to that big rock. The fence is on my soil, so it belongs to me now. Karen turned livid, scanning the document and the plot map. She stood on land that was no longer the HOA's. "But we installed this gate," she sputtered, voice high-pitched. "Right, funded by your HOA. Now I own the ground beneath it, so that means I own the gate itself. I'm even thinking about replacing it with a hammock." Someone in the crowd snickered. Karen's face twisted, but momentum had shifted. A few board members looked entertained. Stephanie, a sharp-witted board secretary, raised an eyebrow with the wry expression of someone watching a twisted soap opera. Karen stormed off, phone glued to her ear, demanding an emergency board meeting. There was no emergency session that could save her. She had leased half the land and built on property she didn't own, while I acquired the other half, fully controlling the fence and gate. The next day, I filed notice with the county clerk. The fence was officially noted as partially installed on private property, so any tampering became trespassing. I sent copies to the HOA, the sheriff, and Karen's lawyer. Then I set up a motion-activated camera and a solar floodlight shining on the gate from my side, more to let them know I was watching than to record them. Karen's reprisals arrived predictably. One letter accused me of sabotaging community morale. Another letter, signed by the HOA's attorney, cited a clause about cooperative land usage. I sent back a copy of my deed and a post-it reading, "Cooperate this." Stephanie visited a few days later to walk the property line. She wasn't hostile, just curious. We strolled the fence's length. She shook her head, annoyed. "Karen told us this was uncontested HOA property," she said. No one cared until she built that gate. Now she's spent $3,000 of the HOA's money on fencing we don't own. After that, the HOA's stance softened. Rumors swirled about misappropriation of funds. One board member resigned, another demanded a financial audit. Meanwhile, Karen filed a zoning complaint against me, which blew up in her face when the official checked the coordinates and told her she had zero authority over that strip. He owns it, the official said. End of story. Eventually, Karen tried one last desperate measure, hiring a locksmith to rechange the lock. The man showed up, examined the gate, confirmed the property lines, and called me. I walked down with cookies and my proof of ownership. The locksmith laughed, ate a cookie, and left without touching a thing. That evening, I set up a folding chair behind the gate, cooler at my side, reading a book in the breeze. Residents passed by, some looking sheepish, a few waved, and one even dropped off a six-pack in thanks for standing up to the nonsense. It was no longer about revenge but principle. If Karen craved control, she wouldn't get it here. By July, the lines were drawn in invisible ink for anyone living nearby. The gate was more than a barrier, it symbolized boundaries, ownership, and the sweet taste of justice for me, and a humiliating monument to overreach for Karen. Yet she wouldn't give up quietly. She set a new strategy in motion, starting with small HOA boats, paddleboats and skiffs, landing at the back edge of my property. Families stepped onto the shore with picnic baskets. When I asked what they were doing, they said they'd gotten a newsletter stating it was Community Lakefront. I pointed to my sign reading Private Property Parcel 2483, Trespassing Not Permitted. They looked stunned. Then buoys appeared in the water, bright orange, strung with netting, labeling a Community Swim Area, HOA members only. I called the county, and the verdict was the same. The HOA had no jurisdiction over navigable waters, so the buoys disappeared within a week. Another teenage neighbor slipped me the minutes of an HOA meeting, revealing Karen's attempts to strategize a lawsuit, reclamation, and to designate my strip as a common greenway via contested vote. Essentially, she planned to vote her way into reclaiming land I'd already bought outright. It was time to make my own move. I phoned an old engineering friend, Brian, who now worked in municipal zoning. Together, we dug up property records. Because my purchase strip was under 6 feet wide in sections and not for essential infrastructure, it qualified for non-commercial preservation classification. With Brian's help, I applied to designate it as restricted access habitat. 2 weeks later, my land became officially protected, no development, no events, no gatherings. The fence, dock, and entire strip were now part of an official environmental rest corridor with a county sign to prove it. The reaction was swift. An emergency HOA meeting was called, but residents were tired, the board was divided, and Stephanie told me that Karen tried to get a vote to override my classification. It flopped when Stephanie read the county ordinance. I'd followed every rule, even paying the fees. The motion died immediately. Karen roamed the fence line muttering into her phone, taking photos like a detective, until one day I caught her red-handed, screwdriver in hand, fiddling with the gate hinges. I approached slowly, letting my shadow fall across her. She jumped up, claiming she was inspecting damage. I just said, "Funny how the camera shows no one else touching the gate." She turned red. "You installed a camera?" "It's perfectly legal on my land, with a decent microphone, too." Indignant, she hissed that I was uncooperative and stomped away. The final blow came soon after, when Stephanie's push for a full audit revealed that Karen had allocated over $88,000 to fencing, safety measures, and even a board retreat at a spa under her niece's name, without proper authorization. The board suspended her, and she resigned, blaming a toxic environment. News traveled, and neighbors thanked me with pies, six-packs, and a handmade sign declaring me local legend, gatekeeper of Hemlock. Peace returned, the buoys didn't reappear, and while the gate stayed locked, I allowed kids and respectful folks to fish or sit by the water if they asked politely. The HOA started drafting a new charter with fewer draconian rules. I got back to fishing, thinking the dust had settled. But Karen returned in a digital sense like a sequel nobody wanted, launching an online campaign called Save Our Shoreline. She posted ranting videos from her new backyard in Florida, calling me an entitled non-member who fenced off sacred community land. She threw in stock footage of crying children, ducks quacking forlornly, and references to one man weaponizing bureaucracy. At first, I was furious. Then the internet turned on her. Reddit threads dissected her arguments, dredging up her old complaints. People found bizarre reviews she'd posted for salons. One thread, titled "Karen Tried to Fence a Lake and Got Wrecked by a Fishing Grandpa," made the front page. Someone turned me into a meme, and local news reached out. I declined an interview, but they ran a piece with a zoomed-in shot of my deed anyway. Stephanie called me, laughing so hard she nearly choked. "You're Hemlock's first viral legend." The furor online eventually died down, but it triggered renewed scrutiny of Karen's HOA record. A few neighbors she'd previously harassed stepped forward with old, dismissed grievances, fiscal misuse and manipulated board votes. Nothing criminal, but enough to blacklist her from HOA leadership in multiple states. Then, in a final stroke of karmic retribution, the county fined Karen close to $10,000 for unauthorized installations and forging a permit claim about the gate. After that, her social media presence vanished except for one cryptic message: "Moving on to better waters." Hemlock Shores began to breathe again. The new board focused on transparency, rewriting the rules for genuine fairness. They even invited me to consult, which I politely declined, offering to drop by with donuts. One morning, I strolled down and swapped out the heavy-duty padlock for something simpler, leaving the gate wide open. Instead, I mounted a weatherproof sign: "Access granted by courtesy, respect earns a welcome, entitlement earns nothing." It was now more of a test of manners than a legal barrier. Surprisingly, folks asked permission before crossing. A teenager named Mason came by, admitting his friends had dared him to sneak in. "But my grandpa said the right way is slower and doesn't burn bridges," he confessed. I gave him a permission slip I had stashed on the porch: "Welcome to the lake. Just don't leave bait wrappers, and don't scare the fish." His grin was worth the small act of kindness. After that, life was peaceful in a way I hadn't felt since I first bought the place. Kids continued fishing, retirees ambled along the shore, and even the raccoons seemed less troublesome. The gate still stood, but its story cast ripples over the community. People treated the area with deeper respect. Maybe they liked the new sense of civility, or maybe they feared becoming the next cautionary tale. A while later, I got a letter from Karen, not a threat, not an apology, but an oddly formal acknowledgement. She said she was reevaluating her relationship with leadership roles and had joined advocacy groups to combat HOA abuse in her new state. She included a pamphlet and wrote by hand, "We started as enemies, but maybe we taught each other something." I didn't answer. It felt better to let it end there. The fence remained, weathered but sturdy, slightly off-kilter from all the drama, and open, not because I had to but because I chose to. A fence intended to lock me out had become a symbol of who could come in, the key made of simple courtesy rather than metal. 1 year later, almost to the day, I stood on my dock, thermos in one hand, fishing rod in the other, gazing at the same corner of Hemlock Lake that once spurred one of the oddest property wars in county history. The gate was still there, its paint faded, the metal a bit rusted, but it was part of the story now. Sometimes symbols matter more than structures themselves. Stephanie organized a Lake Appreciation Day to celebrate the shoreline cleanup and revise the bylaws, acknowledging neighbors who stuck together when things went haywire. She included a surprise segment dubbed Hemlock Legends. I heard my name on a megaphone, looked over to see a crowd applauding, kids hoisting homemade signs: "Thanks, Gate Guy," or "We love the dock." I tried ducking away, but Stephanie dragged me up to accept a carved plaque, in recognition of community integrity and patience. I expected it to say something about causing petty chaos, but it was sincere. A kid asked if I'd write a book. I joked that if I did, I'd call it Karen and the Fence That Couldn't. Everyone laughed, and I realized that in all the madness, property disputes, viral fame, endless meetings, we had, in fact, become a closer neighborhood. We borrowed tools, shared recipes, gossiped a bit. The board was more transparent, the rules clearer, and for 6 months, not one gate incident had been reported. A tiny miracle. Later, Mason wandered by again, this time bringing his younger sister along for fishing lessons. I handed her a small rod, explained baiting a hook, and she soon snagged a bluegill, shrieking like she'd caught a whale. Mason gave me a thumbs up from across the dock. In that moment, everything felt exactly right. Then came an unexpected twist. Near sunset, a silver sedan parked by the road, and a woman got out wearing sunglasses, a floral scarf, and shoes too clean for a dirt path. She walked slowly, taking in the scenery. The hush that fell over people told me her name before anyone spoke it, Karen. She paused at the gate, as though visiting the memory of a regret. She didn't cause a scene. She just stared at the water, then removed a small box from her bag, opened it, looked at whatever was inside, and shut it again. I stayed silent, anticipating an outburst, maybe a demand or phone camera aimed at me. But she simply turned toward her car, glanced my way, and said quietly, "Still got the key?" I raised my thermos in acknowledgement. "Still don't need to use it." She gave a faint nod and left without fanfare. Stephanie asked if I was okay. I shrugged. People change, or they don't. I'm not here to make sense of it. I'm just here to fish and keep kids from hooking each other. That night, a few of us stuck around to roast marshmallows by the water's edge. Mason reenacted the Great Gate War with comical theatrics using fire pokers, and a retired couple offered me apple pie in thanks for facing the HOA meltdown. I didn't do much, I told them. I just held my ground. They insisted I'd done more than I realized. Eventually, the crowd drifted away, leaving me alone with a mild breeze. I surveyed the open gate, the sign on the post, and the worn footpath. A year ago, that gate had locked me out. Now folks passed freely but under my one condition: don't be a jerk. I reflected on the string of angry emails, the random locksmith stunt, the viral memes, and zoning paperwork that felt like a college thesis. A silly fence had mutated into a saga of pride, petty fights, and a neighborhood-spirited rebellion. But through it all, the lake stayed the same, shimmering patiently. Before heading in, I rummaged in my tackle box and pulled out the original padlock Karen had installed. Rusted, frozen from the elements, it served as a souvenir of lines once drawn in metal rather than courtesy. I placed it atop the post and left it there, a silent relic. Then I started walking back to my cabin, where the porch light glowed invitingly. I heard light footsteps behind me. Mason appeared, out of breath, asking if I'd join the late-night fishing event tomorrow. "Wouldn't miss it," I said. "Cool," he grinned. "Also, someone pinned your fishing hat on the HOA board as a joke." I raised an eyebrow. "You?" "Maybe. Community art, right?" I laughed. "Remind me to start charging rent for that kind of art." With that, I headed inside as laughter and the fading day lingered in the air. The lake was serene, the gate open, and a story that began with a lock ended with a legacy, about property rights, neighborly struggles, and how patience can triumph over petty power plays. Sometimes, the most effective key isn't metal at all, it's the courtesy we extend to those who approach with a bit of respect and a willingness to learn.